The wind was the first to tell of the violence. It came scouring across the Arizona flats, a hot, gritty breath that carried the scent of panic sweat, terrified horses, and the sharp tang of gunpowder. From her vantage point in a shallow arroyo, Catherine O'Malley watched the chaos unfold. She had been returning from the Miller homestead, where she'd set young Timmy's broken arm, and the familiar trail had led her to a theater of desperation. Below on the main wagon road, a supply convoy belonging to Silas Croft was under attack. Chiricahua Apache. Not a war party, Catherine's trained eye noted, but a small, desperate band. Their movements were not clumsy, but sharp, honed by starvation. They flowed around the heavy wagon like water around a stone, their focus not on the armed guards, but on the canvas-covered supplies. They were fighting for food, not for glory. The blood-red mesas carved jagged shapes into a sky the color of bleached bone, indifferent witnesses to the brutal skirmish. Croft's men were efficient, their rifle reports cracking through the air with practiced regularity. An Apache warrior no older than a boy fell from his pony. Another clutched a sack of flour, a look of grim triumph on his face, only to be thrown backward by a bullet to the chest, the white powder exploding around him like a departing spirit. Catherine's heart pounded against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of helplessness. Her father's voice echoed in her mind, a calm, steady presence in the storm of her thoughts. You observe before you act, Catherine. Understand the nature of the wound before you reach for the needle. She stayed hidden, her buckskin mare, shifting nervously beneath her, the leather of the reins slick in her palm. Then it happened. A stray shot from one of Croft's guards missed its target and slammed into a wooden crate strapped to the side of the main wagon. The pine planks shattered, spilling a cascade of items into the thick ochre dust. It was a personal trunk, not supplies. Fine fabrics, a silver-backed hairbrush, a leather-bound book. And something else. Something that caught the unforgiving sunlight with a flash of white-hot brilliance. It was a silver locket on a delicate chain, heart-shaped, intricately engraved with the image of a soaring hawk. The world seemed to fall away, the crack of gunfire fading to a dull hum in Catherine's ears. Her breath caught in her throat. It couldn't be. That locket had been her mother's. It had been on Eleanor O'Malley's neck the night of the fire, the night Catherine, then only a child of 8, had lost everything. The authorities had told her father it had melted in the inferno, lost forever in the ashes of their home. Yet there it was, searing in the dust, under the cruel Arizona sun, a ghost from a life she barely remembered. Before the shock could fully register, before she could even form a plan, a hulking figure on horseback spurred forward. Bartholomew Barth, Taggart Croft's brutish foreman. He swung down from his saddle, his boot landing inches from the precious object. With a grunt, he scooped up the locket and a few other scattered valuables, stuffing them into his saddlebag without a second glance. The raid was over. The surviving Apache had vanished back into the canyons, from which they came leaving their dead behind. Catherine remained frozen in the arroyo, the world slowly coming back into focus. The raw grief of her mother's death, a wound long scarred over, was suddenly ripped open and raw. But beneath the pain was a new cold emotion, confusion, a question that burned hotter than the midday sun. How did Silas Croft, a man who had only become a major landowner years after the fire, come to possess her mother's locket? The answer, she knew, lay in Redemption, a town that festered like a blister on the sun-scorched palm of the desert. And she knew with a certainty that chilled her to the bone that a man who held the key to her past might also hold a terrible power over her future. Redemption, Arizona existed for 2 reasons: a shallow but stubborn vein of silver in the surrounding hills and a vital watering hole on the cattle trail north. Its social order was as rigid and cracked as the dried mud in its single dusty street. At the apex sat Silas Croft. His vast cattle ranch, the Circle C, sprawled across the territory, like a possessive hand choking the life from smaller homesteads. Croft was the sun around which the town orbited, and his gravity was inescapable. He was handsome in a severe granite-jawed way, his charm a carefully polished veneer over an ambition as vast and empty as the desert itself. Catherine Kate O'Malley had once occupied a privileged space just beneath him. Her father, Dr. Alistair O'Malley, had been the only doctor for 100 miles, a man respected for his sharp mind, steady hands, and unwavering belief in healing anyone who needed it, regardless of their creed or color. He had given his daughter an education rare for a woman on the frontier, filling her head with Shakespeare philosophy and the intricate workings of the human body. When he passed from a sudden fever 2 years prior, Kate was left with his small but sturdy house, his extensive library, and a deep-seated sense of justice the town found increasingly inconvenient. At 24, she was a striking woman, with hair the color of aged whiskey and eyes the gray of a gathering storm. Silas Croft had made his intentions clear. A marriage to him would secure her future and solidify his dynasty. Every mother in redemption pushed her daughter toward men of lesser standing, knowing Croft's gaze was fixed on Kate. But Kate found his possessiveness chilling his ambition, a suffocating heat. For months she had demurred politely, but firmly, a dance of manners that was beginning to wear thin. Now the locket had changed everything. The dance was over. A confrontation was inevitable. Days after the raid, the simmering tension in the territory boiled over. A different band of Apache, driven to the same brink of starvation, had made a desperate run on another of Croft's supply lines. This time, Taggart's pursuit was more than efficient. It was a massacre. They didn't bring back prisoners. They brought back bodies slung over saddles like deer, a grim warning to any others who dared challenge the Circle C. But one was still alive. Barely. His name was Chayton, which meant falcon in his tongue. He had been a renowned warrior, his movements once as fluid and deadly as his namesake. But a volley of rifle fire had shattered his left leg and hip, and the fall from his horse had done the rest. He was a ruin of a man, his body a canvas of blood, dust, and broken bones. Taggart dragged him into the center of town by a rope and dumped him in the dirt in front of the saloon. "Let him be an example." Taggart bellowed, his face flushed with whiskey and victory. "Let the buzzards pick him clean." The townsfolk gathered a grim circle of onlookers. Some jeered, others watched with silent, morbid satisfaction. Silas Croft stood on the saloon porch, a thin proprietary smile on his lips. This was his justice, swift and absolute. Kate, hearing the commotion from her father's clinic, felt a familiar pull. This was not about politics or territory. This was about a life slipping away in the dirt. Pushing through the crowd, she saw not a savage, but a man drowning in his own blood. Her father's words resonated clear as a bell. "You don't ask a man his creed before you set a bone, Catherine. You ask where it hurts." "Sheriff," she said, her voice clear and steady, cutting through the morbid chatter, "this man needs a doctor." Sheriff Miller, a man whose spine was made of candle wax, shifted nervously. "Now, Kate, this is Croft's business. He's an Apache renegade." "He is a wounded man in the middle of your street?" She countered, her gaze unwavering. "Are you going to let him die like an animal?" A ripple of laughter went through the crowd. "He is an animal," someone slurred from the saloon. Kate ignored them. She knelt in the dust, her clean calico dress soaking up the grime and blood. Chayton's eyes, when they met hers, were black stones of hatred and pain, but they followed her every move. She saw the intelligence flickering there, the unbroken spirit trapped in a mangled cage. "I'm taking him to my father's clinic," she declared, looking not at the sheriff, but directly at Silas Croft. Her voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of an ultimatum. It's what a decent town would do. Croft's smile vanished. This was a direct challenge to his authority, a public rebuke from the one woman he intended to possess. His eyes narrowed. That is a foolish decision, Miss O'Malley. You harbor a killer, you become an accomplice. I harbor a patient, she shot back, her voice ringing with the authority she'd inherited. She turned to two young farmhands who had always respected her family. Henry, Paul, help me get him onto a shutter. Hesitantly shamed by her courage, they complied. As they lifted the broken warrior, the town didn't cheer or protest. They stared, mouths agape. And then a low, cruel sound began to bubble up. It started with Barth Taggart, a guttural chuckle. It spread through the crowd like a contagion, a wave of snickering, of derisive, mocking laughter. The educated, proper Miss O'Malley dirtying herself for a redskin. Silas Crofts intended tending to his trash. The sheer absurdity of it was to them hilarious. The laughter followed her all the way to her father's clinic, a sound of social ruin, the death knell of her reputation. But as Kate bolted the door behind her, laying the unconscious Apache on her father's examination table, she felt not shame, but a hardening resolve. Let them laugh. The town of redemption had just revealed its true, ugly face. And inside her, a cold question echoed: a man who would leave another to die in the street was capable of anything. Even perhaps of setting a fire and stealing a locket from the ashes. The first weeks were a blur of pain, fever, and suspicion. Chayton hovered on the precipice of death, his body consumed by infection. Kate worked tirelessly, summoning every bit of knowledge her father had taught her. She cleaned the wounds, set the shattered bones as best she could, and brewed foul-smelling herbal remedies to fight the fever, some from her father's medical texts, others from a tattered journal he'd kept detailing local Apache medicine. In his rare moments of lucidity, Chayton was a cornered wolf. He refused her food, spat out her medicine, and watched her with an unblinking, hostile glare. To him, she was just another white face, her kindness a trick he couldn't comprehend. He spoke no English, and she spoke no Apache. Their communication was a pantomime of gestures and raw emotion. The town, meanwhile, had fully ostracized her. Jebediah Smith, the mercantile owner, suddenly found his prices for her were double. Women who once greeted her warmly now crossed the street to avoid her. At night, children threw stones at her windows. Her only visitor was Silas Croft. He arrived one evening, removing his hat as he stepped into the clinic, filling the space with his immense presence. The air was thick with the scent of antiseptic and herbs. "Catherine," he said, his voice a low purr of feigned concern. "This has gone on long enough. You've made your point. You have a good heart. Now let the savage die. Come away from this. I can make the town forget." Kate was cleaning a basin, her back to him. "He has a name. It's Chayton. And he's not going to die." Croft stepped closer, his shadow falling over her. "This isn't about him. It's about you. You are destroying yourself. Your father's memory. For what? For him." He gestured dismissively toward the other room where Chayton lay. She finally turned, her gray eyes blazing. "My father would be ashamed of what you did. What this whole town did. He taught me to heal, not to stand by and watch a man be torn apart by vultures. He is." The vulture, Croft's voice, rose, his composure cracking. "He and his kind prey on us, on our work, on our civilization. He was hungry, Silas. His people are starving because men like you take their land and break your promises." The slap was so sudden it was more a crack of sound than a sensation. Kate stumbled back, her hand flying to her cheek, her ears ringing. Croft's face was a mask of fury, his hand still raised. He looked momentarily horrified by his own action, but the rage underneath was real and terrifying. "You will not speak to me that way," he hissed, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "You are mine, Catherine. I have been patient. I have been courteous. But my patience has its limits." From the other room came a low groan, followed by a sudden sharp scraping sound. Both Kate and Croft froze. Slowly, limping horribly, Chayton appeared in the doorway. He was leaning on a wooden crate, his face pale with sweat and agony, but his eyes were pure fire. In his hand, he held a shard of glass he'd broken from a medicine bottle. It wasn't much of a weapon, but the intent was unmistakable. He was defending her. Croft stared at the crippled warrior, then back at Kate. The scene was an insult beyond measure. He let out a short, sharp laugh, a sound devoid of humor. "So you've chosen your protector? A broken hawk. Very well." He looked from the defiant man to the woman whose cheek bore the red print of his hand. "Enjoy your new life, Miss O'Malley. You'll find this town has a long memory." He turned and strode out, slamming the door behind him. The moment he was gone, Chayton's strength gave out. He collapsed, the glass shattering on the floor. Kate rushed to his side, easing him back to his cot. That night, something shifted. He allowed her to dress his wounds without resistance. He drank the broth she offered. The suspicion in his eyes was replaced by a quiet, watchful curiosity. A silent alliance had been forged in the face of a common enemy. As he healed, their world shrank to the four walls of the clinic. He would point to objects, a cup, a book, a needle, and she would say the English word. He would repeat it, his voice rough. Then he would tap his chest and say, "Chayton." He would point to her. "Catherine," she said. "Kate." He tried the name, the K, and T sounds foreign on his tongue. While tending to her meager supplies one afternoon, Kate searched her father's desk for a spare ledger. Her fingers brushed against a small locked journal she hadn't seen in years. It was his private log, not for medical notes, but for personal thoughts. She found the key in a small tin box. Hesitantly, she opened it. The entries were dated from the year before the fire. October 12th. Silas Croft visited again today, ostensibly to discuss a land purchase. He speaks of the future, but his eyes are always on Eleanor. There is a hunger in him that is unsettling. November 3rd. Silas grows more possessive of Eleanor with each passing day. He cannot seem to comprehend that she chose me. His temperament is a storm waiting for a sky. He masks it with charm, but I see the lightning behind his eyes. December 1st. Had words with Silas today. Told him his attentions toward my wife were unwelcome. He laughed it off, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. He said I didn't deserve a woman like her. I fear his jealousy is curdling into something far more dangerous. Kate's hands trembled. The entries confirmed a darkness she had only sensed. Croft's obsession hadn't begun with her. It was an inheritance. The image of the locket flashed in her mind, now imbued with a sinister light. It wasn't just a stolen memento. It was a trophy. A week later, armed with this terrifying new knowledge, Kate knew she had to face him. She needed an excuse, a reason to see him that wouldn't raise alarm. She found it in a property dispute notice that had been delivered that morning. Croft was claiming a section of land that bordered her father's property, a section containing their well. She found him at the Circle C ranch house, a grand, imposing structure that seemed to sneer down at the rest of the territory. He received her in his study, a room of dark wood and polished leather that smelled of whiskey and power. He was the picture of civility, offering her a drink, his voice smooth as silk. The red mark on her cheek had long since faded, but the memory of his touch hung between them. "Catherine, to what do I owe the pleasure?" She held up the notice. "This is a mistake, Silas. This well has been on my family's land for 20 years. He smiled a predator's smile. An old map was found, a clerical error since corrected. "The well is mine." He leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "But I am a reasonable man. Perhaps we can come to an arrangement." Kate held his gaze, her heart hammering. "I'm not here to bargain for my own water, Silas. I'm here for the truth." She took a steadying breath. "I saw the raid on your supply wagon a few weeks ago. I saw what fell from the broken crate." His smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "Supplies get damaged. It happens." "It wasn't supplies," she said, her voice dropping each word a carefully placed stone. "It was a personal trunk, and inside it I saw my mother's locket, the silver one with the hawk engraved on it." Silence descended upon the room, thick and suffocating. Croft's charming facade began to crumble, revealing the granite fury beneath. "You've been having dreams, haven't you?" he asked, his voice a low, chilling growl. The question was so unexpected, it stole her breath. "About the fire. You smell the smoke. You hear the shouting." Kate could only stare, her blood running cold. How could he know? He stood up slowly, walking around the desk until he stood over her. "I was there that night, Catherine. Your father was in Tucson at a medical conference. The fire started in the stable. I was the first one to see the flames. I ran to help." He leaned closer, his voice a conspiratorial whisper. "I loved your mother. More than that weak, bookish man of hers ever could. She was meant for me. That night, I was going to be her hero. I was going to run into that house and carry her out of the flames. She would have seen then who the real man was." His eyes were gleaming with a feverish, long-buried madness. "But the fire, it moved so fast. It was an inferno. I couldn't get to her. I failed." He straightened up his face, twisting into a mask of self-pity and rage. "Your father, he blamed me. Said my recklessness caused it. He turned the whole town against me. And the Apache? They raided our stock that same week. It was easy to let the whispers start that they had set the fire. It all worked out." He gestured around the opulent room. "As you can see, you set the fire." Kate whispered, the horror of it settling upon her like a shroud. "You intended to rescue her from a fire you started." "It was a mistake," he roared, his control finally shattering. "A miscalculation. But she's the one who died, and you." He reached out his hand, gently tracing the line of her jaw, his touch of violation. "You are her living image. You have her fire. I've waited years, Catherine. Waited for you to grow up. To build all of this for you. To finally have the life with you that your father stole from me." He picked up the locket from a small box on his desk, letting it dangle from his fingers. "I took this from the ashes. A reminder of what I am owed." The conflict was no longer about land or water or a wounded man in her clinic. It was a psychological war against a murderer, a man whose obsession had festered for 16 years and had now fixed itself squarely on her. She was not the object of his affection. She was the final piece of his twisted prize. "We have to go," Kate said that night, her voice barely a whisper. She sat across from Chayton, the lantern light, casting long shadows on the walls of the small clinic. She had told him everything, the simple words they now shared sufficient to convey the monstrous truth. not safe here. He nodded slowly, his gaze intense. He understood. He had known Croft was a man of poison from the beginning. But where could they go? She was a pariah marked by a killer's obsession, and he was a crippled Apache. They were outcasts, a tribe of two in a land that wanted them both dead. Then Chaitan did something unexpected. He reached out and took her hand. His hand was rough, calloused, but his touch was surprisingly gentle. He held her gaze and spoke a few careful, halting English words he had pieced together. You, wife, me, husband. He paused, searching for the next words. They no touch, wife. Kate stared at him, stunned. It wasn't a declaration of love, in the way the poets she read described it. It was a strategic proposal, a vow of mutual survival. In the eyes of the law, a husband had rights, a duty to protect. A marriage, even one scorned, offered a sliver of legitimacy, a shield however flimsy. In the eyes of his people, a wife was sacred. It was the ultimate alliance of the dispossessed. She looked at this broken man, who had tried to defend her with a piece of glass, whose quiet strength had been her only anchor in a sea of hatred. She looked at the town outside her window, ruled by a man who had murdered her mother, and now claimed her as his own. Her choice was clear. Yes, she whispered, husband. They were married by a traveling preacher, a nervous man named Father Michael, who was paid a silver dollar and asked no questions. The only witnesses were the dust motes dancing in the afternoon sun. When the news broke, the town of Redemption didn't just whisper. They roared with laughter. It was the scandal of the territory. Catherine O'Malley, the doctor's daughter, had married a crippled Apache. It was the punchline to a long, cruel joke. But as Kate and Chaitan packed their wagon that night, they didn't hear the laughter. They heard only the quiet promise of a new beginning, a future they would have to build with their own hands, far from the echoes of mockery and the shadow of a madman. They traveled north into the high desert plains that even Silas Croft considered worthless. It was a harsh, unforgiving landscape of sagebrush rock and a relentless sun that hammered the ground into a shimmering white-hot anvil. To anyone else, their wagon, 2 sturdy mules, and meager supplies were a picture of destitution. To them, it was a kingdom waiting to be claimed. Chaitan, despite his crippling limp, was the architect of their survival. He directed them to a small hidden canyon he knew from his youth, a place the white men had overlooked. Carved into the canyon wall was a shallow cave offering shelter, and at its back a thin, steady trickle of water seeped from the rock, a secret spring pure and life-giving. Water is life. Chaitan stated, his English growing more confident each day. Here we have life. Their first months were a brutal testament to their resilience. Kate's hands, once accustomed to turning the pages of a book, became calloused from digging and lifting stones. Together, they expanded the cave, building a stone and adobe facade, creating a humble but defensible home. Chaitan, unable to hunt, as he once had taught Kate how to set snares, her patience and steady hands made her a natural. He showed her which plants were medicine and which were food. She, in turn, taught him to read and write patiently, guiding his hand as he formed the strange, angular letters of the English alphabet. Their marriage, born of necessity, began to transform. It was a partnership forged in shared labor and mutual respect. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire. She read aloud from her father's books while he carved intricate figures from pieces of cottonwood. One evening, he presented her with a small, perfectly rendered falcon, its wings outstretched as if about to take flight. A quiet affection grew between them, deep and strong as the roots of the mesquite trees. It was in the way she instinctively reached to steady him when his leg gave way. in the shared understanding smile across the crackling fire that said more than words ever could. Their homestead, which they called Falcon's Creek, slowly became more than just a home. It became a hub. Scattered Apache bands, hearing that the warrior Chayton still lived and that his white wife was a healer, began to come cautiously at first to trade furs and silver for Kate's medical aid and supplies. Soon others followed, prospectors seeking Chayton's guidance on where to find water. Small, independent ranchers squeezed by Croft's ever-expanding empire who found Kate's prices fair and her dealings honest. Falcon's Creek became a trading post, an oasis of neutrality in a land defined by conflict. Their power was not in land or cattle, but in knowledge and access. Chayton knew the land's secrets. Kate understood the world of contracts and numbers. When a group of ranchers complained that Croft was damming a creek and stealing their water, Kate pored over territorial maps and her father's old legal books. She found a clause about shared water rights and wrote a letter on their behalf to the territorial marshal in Tucson, a carefully worded, legally sound document he couldn't ignore. The marshal, a man named Elias Rowe, rode up to investigate, and Croft was forced to release the water. It was a small victory, but it sent a shockwave through the territory. The woman who married the savage had a mind as sharp as a lawyer's. The savage she married knew the land better than any mapmaker. The laughter from redemption began to sound hollow. Silas Croft heard of their growing influence, and it was like salt in a festering wound. They were supposed to crawl away and die. Instead, they were thriving. To him, it was more than a business problem. It was a profound personal mockery. They were a living testament to his failure to control Catherine, a constant reminder of the secret she carried. He had to erase them. He sent Barth Taggart and a few of his men to deliver a message. They rode into Falcon's Creek one afternoon, arrogant and armed. Well, Taggart sneered, spitting a wad of tobacco near Kate's feet. Playing House O'Malley. Kate stood on her porch, a shotgun held loosely in her arms. "State your business, Taggart, or ride out." Chatton emerged from the house, leaning on a sturdy walking stick, his posture proud. He said nothing, simply watching. "Croft wants you to know this land is his," Taggart snarled. "He's giving you 1 week to clear out." Kate smiled, a cold, thin smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You tell Mr. Croft that according to the Territorial Homestead Act of 1862, this land was unclaimed. We have filed a claim with the land office in Tucson. We have the papers to prove it. If he has a problem, he can take it up with the United States government." Taggart was momentarily stunned. He was a man of fists and guns, not laws and papers. Chayton took a slow step forward. He pointed his walking stick toward the canyon ridge. Taggart's men followed his gaze. Lined up on the rocks above, silent as ghosts, were a dozen Apache warriors, bows in hand. They hadn't been there a moment ago. "Our friends," Chayton said, his voice soft but carrying. "They do not like uninvited guests." Taggart's face went pale. He had walked into a trap. Without another word, he and his men wheeled their horses around and galloped away, leaving a cloud of humiliation in their wake. As the dust settled, Kate looked at Chayton, a slow smile spreading across her face. He had used his strategic mind, she had used her legal knowledge. Together, they had beaten back the giant. The laughter from redemption was now completely silent. In its place, a new sound was rising across the territory, a whisper of respect mingled with fear. The retreat of Barth Taggart was not an end, but a declaration of war. Silas Croft, humiliated and increasingly desperate to bury his past, began to coil around Falcon's Creek like a serpent slowly tightening his grip. If direct intimidation failed, he would strangle them with cunning. His first move was economic. Suddenly, freight wagons destined for Falcons Creek found their axles breaking or their drivers falling ill. The price of flour, salt, and ammunition tripled overnight, but only for Kate. "He's trying to starve us out," she told Chayton, poring over their dwindling ledgers. Chayton listened, his face impassive, as he sharpened a knife by the firelight. "He thinks the road is his only weapon. He is wrong. There are other roads." The next week, Chayton disappeared into the mountains. He returned at dawn on the fourth day with a small, wiry man named Hernan Castillo, the leader of a group of Comanchero traders from New Mexico. A deal was struck. Castillo's traders would bring supplies from Santa Fe using secret trails Chayton showed them, bypassing Croft's stranglehold completely. The serpent's coil had been loosened. Croft's second attack was on their reputation. He spread rumors that Falcons Creek was a haven for renegades, that Kate was a witch, and that Chayton was amassing a war party. Fear was a more potent poison than poverty. Marshal Rowe paid them another visit, his face grim. "Folks are scared, Kate. They're saying you're arming the Apache." "We're trading Elias," Kate said calmly. Chayton answered the question about the warriors on the ridge. "My wife's family," he said, his English now precise and steady. "They visit. They protect this house. Is it a crime to protect your house?" Rowe left satisfied for now, but warned them Croft has the ear of the governor. "He's painting a target on your backs." But Croft's greatest weapon, the one he had been saving, was water. He began a massive project, a dam on the main spring in the mountains, so the lifeblood for the entire region. Pushed through by a corrupt official in Tucson, the dam would divert all the water to a new reservoir for his own cattle. It was a move of breathtaking cruelty, designed to turn the territory into a dust bowl, destroying not only Falcons Creek, but dozens of smaller ranches as well. It was his final desperate move to erase the woman who knew his secret. News of the dam spread like a grass fire. A delegation of small ranchers, the very men who had once shunned them, arrived at their door, hats in hand. Their leader was a grizzled old rancher named Gus Halloway. "Mrs. O'Malley." "Chayton," he said, his voice heavy with defeat. "Croft's going to ruin us. We heard what you did before with the letter. We were wondering if you could help us." Kate looked at their desperate faces. This was about more than revenge or survival. It was about building a community that could stand against tyranny. "Mr. Croft is using the law as a weapon," she said, her voice ringing with conviction. "It's time we taught him that it can be a shield as well." Chayton then spoke, his voice quiet but firm. "My wife will fight with paper. I will fight with knowledge. But you must fight with us. No more whispers. No more hiding. We stand together or we all fall." In the dusty yard of the trading post, an unlikely alliance was formed: a woman outcast, a crippled Apache warrior, a dozen desperate white ranchers, and the silent promise of support from the Apache bands in the hills. The serpent had coiled too tightly, and in its arrogance, it had forced its victims to band together. The final battle for the soul of the territory was about to begin. The war against the dam was fought on two fronts. Kate waged hers in letters and ledgers, Chayton his in the canyons and the minds of men. Kate and Gus Halloway journeyed to Tucson, to the stuffy territorial land office. The corrupt official Reginald Pike dismissed them out of hand. "Mr. Croft's claim is perfectly legal, madam." "Is it?" Kate replied, placing a stack of documents on his desk. "Because according to the original federal surveys, that spring is a public water source. Your signature privatizing it is in direct violation of federal law." She pushed another paper forward. "Furthermore, we have a signed affidavit from a former Circle C hand detailing a conversation he overheard between you and Mr. Croft concerning a transfer of $500. I believe the term for that is bribery. Pike's face turned a pasty white. A copy of this file has been sent to Marshal Rowe. Kate finished sweetly. And another is on its way to Washington. We expect construction to cease immediately. While Kate dismantled Croft's legal foundation, Chayton eroded his operational one. He and a small mixed group of ranchers' sons and Apache warriors moved like ghosts. They created rock slides to block supply roads. They fouled the water caches for Croft's outlying herds, forcing them back toward the main ranch, straining his resources. Chayton's masterpiece was psychological. Knowing the hired dam workers were superstitious, his men created strange, unsettling signs. Unearthly whistles echoed through the canyons at night. Tools disappeared only to reappear in bizarre patterns. An arrow fletched with an owl's feather, a bird of ill omen, would appear embedded in the dam's framework each morning. Progress faltered. Hammers fell silent. The desert's vast emptiness crept back into the work camp. Croft's Grand Dam was becoming a monument to his own paranoia. Men convinced the land was cursed deserted their posts. Silas Croft found himself besieged. He was being outmaneuvered by a woman with a book and a cripple with a walking stick. His rage became a white-hot inferno. The pretense of civility was gone. He summoned Barth Taggart. "I don't want them scared off," Croft snarled, his voice a low growl. "I want them gone. Burn the trading post to the ground. Kill the man. Bring me the woman. Understand?" Taggart grinned a cruel, predatory expression. This was the language he understood. He gathered 20 of the most ruthless men on the Circle C payroll. They were no longer cowboys. They were a private army armed with rifles, pistols, and torches. But Croft's plan had a flaw. A young Mexican stable hand on the Circle C, whose sister Kate had once saved from a deadly snake bite, felt a debt of honor. He overheard the orders. Under the cover of darkness, he slipped away, heading not for the sheriff, but for Falcon's Creek. The warning came just after sunset. The young stable hand, his horse lathered and near collapse, gasped out the news. There was no time to run, no time to appeal to the law. Panic rippled through the ranchers gathered at the post, but Kate's calm voice cut through the fear. "We knew this day might come. We can scatter and be hunted down one by one, or we can make our stand here together." It was Chayton who gave them a plan. He was no longer the swift warrior of his youth, but his mind was a razor-sharp weapon. "They expect a fort," he said, his eyes scanning the faces in the firelight. "We will not give them one. They expect fear. We will give them a trap." The main trading post, their home, would be the bait. Women and children were sent to the safety of the hidden cave, guarded by Gus Halloway. The rest, a small force of a dozen ranchers and 10 Apache warriors, melted into the rocks and shadows of the canyon. As Taggart and his 20 riders thundered into the canyon, a fierce wind began to pick up from the west, carrying the taste of dust. It whipped at their clothes and stung their eyes. Ahead, they saw exactly what they expected, the trading post lit and seemingly peaceful. "Let's give them a proper housewarming," Taggart roared, pulling a torch from its holster. They charged forward, firing wildly, their dark shapes illuminated by the flickering torchlight. They were a wave of chaotic violence, focused entirely on the building ahead, blinded by their own bloodlust and the swirling dust the rising wind kicked into their faces. They didn't notice the silent figures detaching themselves from the rocks on either side of the canyon. The first volley was not gunfire. It was a flight of arrows from the Apache warriors on the canyon rim. Silent and deadly, they found their marks in the gloom. 3 of Croft's men tumbled from their saddles without a sound. Confusion, magnified by the stinging dust, rippled through the attackers. Before they could recover, the ranchers, hidden behind boulders, opened fire. Their shots were disciplined, aimed not at the men, but at the horses. A screaming, panicked mass of downed animals created a barricade, trapping half of Taggart's men in the open. "It's a trick," Taggart bellowed, trying to rally his disorganized force. "Flush them out." But then the final piece of Chaitan's trap was sprung. Kate, positioned on the roof of the trading post, fired a signal shot. It wasn't aimed at the men, but at a wagon seemingly abandoned near the mouth of the canyon, filled with oil-soaked brush and a small keg of black powder. The bullet struck home. The explosion was deafening. A wall of fire erupted, sealing the canyon entrance. The sandstorm, which had been a rising threat, hit them with full force. A howling gale of sand and fury descended upon the canyon, reducing visibility to mere feet. The world became a maelstrom of roaring wind, stinging sand, and the ghostly shifting shadows cast by the burning wagon. It was impossible to distinguish friend from foe. The battle devolved into a desperate, terrifying melee. Croft's men, disoriented and surrounded, fired wildly into the churning darkness. But Chaitan's forces used the storm as an ally, firing from cover, melting away, and reappearing in new positions. In the midst of the chaos, Taggart saw a figure move near the trading post, Chaitan directing his men. For Taggart, this was personal. He let out a roar of pure hatred and charged, crashing into Chaitan and sending both men to the ground. Taggart's size was overwhelming. He pinned Chaitan, his massive hands closing around his throat. "I'll kill you with my bare hands, you filth," he snarled. Chaitan couldn't use his broken leg for leverage, but as Taggart squeezed his hand, shot-up fingers held stiffly and drove them into the soft spot of Taggart's throat. Taggart gagged his grip, loosening. In that split second, Chaitan twisted, pulling a knife from his belt and striking Taggart's temple with a heavy pommel. The big man slumped sideways, unconscious. Just as Chaitan struggled to his feet, another figure emerged from the swirling dust. It was Silas Croft. He had followed his men, unable to resist watching his victory. He held a Colt peacemaker, and it was aimed directly at Chaitan's heart. "My mistake, Croft," said his voice eerily calm. "I should have killed you myself that first day." Before he could pull the trigger, a voice cut through the howl of the wind. "Silas." Both men turned. Kate stood on the porch, her face smudged with soot, a Winchester rifle in her hands. The stock was firm against her cheek, her aim steady despite the gale. "It's over," she said, her voice clear and hard. "Your men are beaten. Drop the gun." Croft laughed, a dry, broken sound. He swung his pistol toward Kate. The world seemed to slow. Two shots rang out so close together, they sounded like one. Croft's shot went wide, splintering the wood next to Kate's head. Kate's did not miss. Silas Croft stood frozen for a moment, a look of profound surprise on his face. A small dark hole had appeared in the center of his forehead. He dropped his pistol, staggered back, and then collapsed into the dust, his body immediately claimed by the shifting sands of the storm. His reign of terror was finally at an end. Silence fell over the canyon, broken only by the shriek of the wind and the crackle of the fire. When the sun rose, the sandstorm had passed, leaving behind a world scoured clean. Marshal Elias Rowe arrived 2 days later to find not a scene of chaotic slaughter, but an orderly community already rebuilding. The testimony was irrefutable. Taggart's confession, the torches, and the final piece of evidence, the engraved silver locket Rowe's men found in Silas Croft's pocket. It corroborated Catherine's story of the fire that had killed her mother 16 years ago, transforming the battle from a land dispute into the final act of a long-overdue reckoning. The official report would state that Silas Croft had been killed while leading an illegal armed assault, and that his death had exposed a history of crime, including murder. The Circle C empire, built on intimidation and a dark secret, crumbled overnight. In the months that followed, Falcons Creek was transformed. With Croft's lands broken up and opened for fair settlement, the trading post boomed, becoming the heart of a new community. The town of Redemption, its economic lifeblood rerouted, began to wither its laughter, long since forgotten. Kate and Chayton did not rule with guns or laws, but with the same principles that had allowed them to survive: mutual respect, fair dealings, and an unshakable sense of justice. Using funds liquidated from Croft's estate, Kate established the territory's first proper clinic and a school fulfilling her father's legacy on her own terms. Their home became the unofficial center of the territory, a place where disputes were settled with reason, not rifles. Months later, Kate stood on the hill overlooking the thriving, diverse community they had built. The setting sun painted the mesas in hues of orange and deep purple. Chayton joined her, his limp a familiar rhythm beside her. In his hand, he held the silver locket which the marshal had returned to her. She took it, its metal cool against her skin. For a moment, she stared at the engraved hawk, a symbol of a past she now fully understood. The pain was still there, a dull ache of memory, but it no longer had power over her. She didn't open it. Instead, she walked to a small, newly planted cottonwood tree at the crest of the hill. She knelt and with her bare hands dug a small hole at its base. She placed the locket inside, a final gesture of letting go of the past's pain while honoring its memory. She covered it with earth, burying the ghost of Silas Croft and his obsession forever. She stood and took Chayton's hand. They stood together, not as rulers, but as partners looking toward the future they had carved from the ashes, their quiet pride a testament to a love that had not only survived the brutal frontier, but had tamed it.